They announced my death on television, and my own sister raised a glass of champagne and said, "Call the lawyer. This house will finally belong to us." So how did I end up standing in my doorway, alive, listening to them celebrate? My name is Deanna. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a book restorer. My life used to revolve around quiet rooms, fragile pages, and preserving other people's histories. I never imagined I would become the center of a story like this one involving betrayal, attempted murder, and the people I once trusted most. But let me take you back to the beginning. It was late afternoon in Portland, Maine, when everything started to unravel. Gray mist rolled in from the coast, wrapping the streets in that familiar cold dampness locals learned to live with. I remember standing on the edge of our family's long driveway, hesitating for a moment, before getting into my SUV. The air felt heavy, charged, like a storm that hadn't decided whether to break yet. Inside the house, my older sister Priscilla lay curled on the velvet sofa, clutching her stomach. She was crying. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she pressed them against her abdomen. She told me she was having unbearable cramps and begged me to drive into town to pick up a special prescription. She said it was the only medication that worked for her. I didn't want to go. The weather was turning, and I had already had a long day at my restoration studio. But she looked genuinely distressed, and Franklin, her husband, stepped in immediately. He placed a steady hand on my shoulder and spoke in that calm, reassuring tone he always used when he wanted something. "I'll stay here with her," he said. "You go. Don't waste time. She really needs it." I remember grabbing my keys with shaky hands. I remember thinking, this is what family does. We show up for each other. Before I pulled away, Franklin leaned down to my driver's side window. His expression was serious, almost urgent. "Deanna," he said, "don't bother adjusting your seat or checking your mirrors. Just go. Go as fast as you can." At the time, I thought it was concern. Now I know it was instruction. I drove off into the mist, unaware that only minutes after I disappeared around the bend, a catering van was pulling through our back gate. Not medical supplies, not emergency equipment. Champagne, gourmet appetizers, party trays. They were preparing to celebrate. The coastal highway stretched ahead of me like a pale ribbon, slick with moisture. My phone buzzed once on the passenger seat, probably a spam call. I ignored it and focused on the road. The drive was quiet at first. Too quiet. Then I approached Dead Man's Curve near Cape Elizabeth, a notorious stretch where the guardrail's thin and the drop to the Atlantic is almost vertical. Locals know to slow down there. I pressed the brake pedal. It went straight to the floor. No resistance. No slowing, just air. My heart slammed into my ribs as I pumped the pedal again and again. But the speedometer kept climbing. The steering wheel vibrated violently in my hands while the SUV surged downhill like it had been released. That was the moment my mind flashed to Franklin. To the garage. To how he'd been checking something under the hood earlier that day. The realization hit me with icy clarity. This wasn't an accident. I screamed into the empty cabin. "Please, God. Not like this." The front tires left the pavement, and suddenly the world turned into spinning gray sky and black water. Metal screamed, glass exploded. My body slammed against something hard, and then everything went dark. I don't know how long I was unconscious. What woke me was freezing seawater spraying my face. Pain flooded back into my body all at once, my ribs, my shoulder, my leg. I tried to move and cried out. Somehow, I had been thrown clear of the wreck and tangled in thick scrub bushes that broke my fall before I hit the jagged rocks below. My SUV burned in the surf almost 100 feet down, sending black smoke into the twilight. A fisherman who had been checking lobster traps nearby scrambled down the slope to reach me. His hands were rough and shaking as he helped me sit up. "I saw your car fly off," he kept saying. "Nobody survives that curve." He wanted to call an ambulance. He wanted to call the police. But something inside me resisted. Because if the police were alerted right away, Priscilla would hear, Franklin would hear, and whoever tried to kill me would know they failed. I grabbed the fisherman's arm and begged him to help me get back to the main road quietly. He hesitated, then nodded. Minutes later, I was limping into the back seat of a passing taxi, leaving the burning wreckage behind. My body ached with every breath, but something else was rising inside me, something hotter than pain. I needed to see their faces. I needed to know the truth. The taxi carried me back toward my house, toward the place where I still believed love lived. And when I finally stepped onto the porch, soaked, bruised, and shaking, I heard music drifting through the door. Jazz. Laughter. Champagne corks popping. I pressed myself into the shadows beside the cedar siding and listened. That's when I heard my sister's voice. She wasn't crying. She was laughing. I watched through a narrow gap in the curtains as Priscilla lifted a glass and stared at the television report confirming my supposed death. Her smile was wide, bright, almost manic. She turned toward Franklin and shouted with joy, "Call the lawyer. Finally, this house will belong to us, and we never have to deal with her again." My knees nearly gave out. The betrayal cut deeper than the crash ever could. Inside, they clinked glasses and talked about clearing debts with my life insurance payout. They spoke about selling my belongings, changing the locks, and turning my restoration studio into a breakfast nook for mimosas. They were dividing my life like loot. And in that moment, standing outside my own home like a ghost, I understood something that changed me forever. The people I grew up with weren't waiting for me to come back. They were waiting for me to disappear. And that realization marked the beginning of their reckoning. I stayed hidden beside the porch, my back pressed against the cold cedar siding, barely breathing. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest from the crash, but I didn't move. I couldn't. The pain in my ribs was nothing compared to what I was hearing inside. They were already dismantling my life. Priscilla paced across the hardwood floor in sharp heels that echoed like gunshots in the hallway where we used to race each other as kids. Her voice carried easily through the open windows, dripping with excitement instead of sorrow. "First thing tomorrow, we call a locksmith," she said. "Every bolt, every door. I don't want a single spare key floating around." Franklin let out a low chuckle as he poured himself another glass of my father's expensive scotch. The sound of ice clinking against crystal felt obscene. I closed my eyes. This was the same man who had once helped me carry boxes into my studio. The same man who smiled politely at family dinners and asked about my restoration projects like he cared. Now he raised his glass and said, "We'll finally be able to breathe." Priscilla laughed. "I can't wait to see the curb lined with trash bags full of her old sweaters and those dusty books she's obsessed with." My stomach twisted. Those weren't just books. They were first editions, family heirlooms, volumes I had spent years repairing page by page. That studio wasn't a hobby. It was my livelihood, my purpose. She waved her hand dismissively. "That whole restoration room is such a waste of space. I'm turning it into a bright breakfast nook. Imagine morning mimosas with ocean views." Franklin nodded approvingly. "Sounds perfect." He leaned back against the counter and started talking about his debts like he was reading off a grocery list. "The casino's been breathing down my neck, the bookies too. But once that insurance hits, gone. All of it." "Insurance." The word landed inside me like a brick. He continued, lowering his voice. "Double payout for accidental death. Hundreds of thousands left after we clear everything. That's your designer bags, your dresses, your trips." He lifted his glass toward Priscilla. "The most profitable thing your sister ever did was disappear." I felt dizzy. My own brother-in-law had just reduced my existence to a balance sheet. Priscilla began rummaging through my mother's antique china cabinet. Porcelain clinked under her careless fingers as she pulled out pieces and inspected them like merchandise. "We should sell these too," she said. "People love vintage stuff. And those hand-woven rugs Mom adored? They'll fetch a decent price online." Franklin shrugged. "Sentimental junk. We don't need it." I stared at the floorboards beneath my feet and remembered my mother kneeling there years ago, teaching me how to polish silver properly. I remembered my father explaining why certain books mattered, why history deserved preservation. Inside, they were treating our family legacy like clearance inventory. Priscilla sneered. She thought staying here to care for Mom and Dad made her noble. Meanwhile, I was out seeing the world. Her voice hardened. She always acted like this place belonged to her. Franklin glanced around the living room, already envisioning renovations. "Waterfront property in Maine is skyrocketing. We'll flip this place or turn it into a luxury rental. Tourists will pay anything. The air felt thin. My hands trembled against my thighs. They spoke about my home the way vultures discuss bones. Priscilla clinked her glass against the decanter. We should throw a real party next weekend. Officially debut the new estate owners. Franklin grinned. I've already looked into yacht rentals. Victory cruise. They toasted. I watched through a narrow slit in the curtains as their faces warped with greedy delight. I didn't recognize them anymore. Or maybe I finally did. They talked about tearing down walls, hauling away my personal belongings, and replacing everything with minimalist furniture and white marble. Priscilla said she was relieved she'd never have to hear me talk about tradition again. She was always lecturing about heritage, she scoffed. Now we get a fresh start. Built on my supposed corpse. Franklin assured her the insurance paperwork was already moving. He bragged about how easy it had been to convince the agents I was fragile, how dangerous my coastal drives were. Every word stabbed deeper. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. And as I listened longer, something cold and steady formed inside my chest. The shock faded. The disbelief evaporated. In its place came clarity. These people didn't just want me gone. They had engineered it. I thought back to earlier that day, to Priscilla writhing dramatically on the sofa, to Franklin hovering just close enough to seem concerned, to how quickly he ushered me out the door. I remembered how he had glanced at his watch, how he had leaned into my window and told me not to check my mirrors, how he had timed everything. My heartbeat slowed. I finally understood that the crash wasn't bad luck. It was choreography. They had created a timeline where my death aligned perfectly with catered champagne and financial freedom. I stood there in the dark, a living ghost, watching my own funeral party. And the strangest thing happened. I stopped crying. I stopped shaking. Because when someone shows you who they truly are, something inside you either breaks or hardens. Mine hardened. I realized I had two choices. I could run, or I could walk back into that house and force them to face the woman they tried to erase. But before I stepped into the light, I needed one more thing. I needed to remember exactly how I ended up in that ocean. Because the truth wasn't just that they celebrated my death. The truth was that they sent me there. And once I fully accepted that, there was no turning back. The longer I stood outside listening to them celebrate, the clearer one truth became. They didn't just benefit from my accident. They had created it. That realization pulled me backward in time, back to the afternoon when everything still looked normal, when I still believed I was driving to help my sister. Earlier that day, sunlight had filtered softly through the living room curtains. Priscilla was stretched across the velvet sofa, one arm draped dramatically over her stomach, her face twisted in what looked like genuine pain. She kept letting out quiet moans, pressing her lips together like she was trying not to cry. "Deanna," she whispered when she saw me. "I don't think I can stand up. The cramps are unbearable." I rushed to her side. She took my hand with trembling fingers. "There's a prescription at the pharmacy in town," she said. "It's the only thing that helps. Please, can you go?" I hesitated. The weather report had warned of thick fog rolling in from the coast. I could already see gray clouds gathering beyond the windows. Normally, I avoided driving along the cliffs when visibility dropped. But she was my sister. And then Franklin appeared. He positioned himself between us so smoothly, I barely noticed it at first. His voice was calm, steady, protective. "I'll stay here with her," he said. "You go. She needs that medication as soon as possible." He squeezed my shoulder lightly, the way people do when they're trying to comfort you. I remember thinking how kind he seemed in that moment. I grabbed my keys. As I headed for the door, Priscilla reached out weakly and called my name again. Her eyes were glassy. She looked scared. "Please hurry." Outside, the air was damp and heavy. I climbed into my SUV and started the engine. Franklin stepped out behind me and leaned down toward the driver's window. His face was serious. "Don't waste time adjusting your seat or checking mirrors," he said quietly. "Just go. Go fast." I nodded, already anxious to help, and pulled away. I didn't know that was the last time they expected to see me alive. The road hugged the coastline, twisting through pine trees and rocky overlooks. Mist crept in quickly, blurring the horizon. I drove faster than usual, replaying Priscilla's pale face in my mind. I told myself I was doing the right thing. The drive felt strangely empty. No music, no traffic, just the steady hum of tires against wet asphalt. Then I approached the downhill stretch near the curve. I pressed the brake pedal. It dropped straight to the floor. At first, my brain refused to accept it. I pressed again. Nothing. My heart slammed into my ribs as panic surged through my body. I pumped the pedal harder, faster, but the SUV only gained speed. The steering wheel began to vibrate violently in my hands. I tried to downshift. I tried to pull the emergency brake. Nothing responded. The curve rushed toward me like a wall. That's when a horrifying thought sliced through the chaos. Franklin had been in the garage earlier. He'd said he was checking a noise near the wheels. I saw his face in my mind. Calm, focused, calculated. My chest tightened. This wasn't mechanical failure. This was sabotage. I screamed. I don't remember exactly what I said, something desperate, something raw, but the words disappeared into the empty cabin as the SUV hurled itself toward the edge of the cliff. The front tires lifted. Time fractured. The world became spinning sky and dark water and the sound of metal tearing itself apart. Glass exploded. My body slammed sideways, then forward, then nothing. Blackness swallowed everything. When I came back to consciousness, cold was the first thing I felt. Freezing seawater sprayed against my face, shocking me awake. Every nerve screamed as pain flooded through my body. My ribs burned, my shoulder throbbed, my leg felt like it was on fire. I tried to move and cried out. I was tangled in thick scrub bushes halfway down the embankment. Somehow, I had been thrown clear of the wreckage. Below me, my SUV burned where it had landed in the surf, smoke curling into the gray evening sky. I stared at it in disbelief. That was supposed to be my grave. I heard footsteps scrambling over rocks. A man appeared beside me, older, weather-beaten, eyes wide with shock. "I saw the car go over," he said breathlessly. "I didn't think anyone could survive that." He introduced himself as a fisherman who had been checking his traps nearby. He wanted to call emergency services immediately. I grabbed his arm. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "Please, just help me get to the road." He looked conflicted, but something in my eyes must have convinced him. He helped me stand. My legs barely held me. Every step felt like walking on broken glass. Together, we climbed back toward the highway. By the time we reached the road, I was soaked, bleeding, and barely upright. A passing taxi slowed when it saw us waving frantically. The fisherman explained what had happened. The driver helped me into the back seat, and as the door closed, reality finally hit me. I should have been dead. My sister and her husband were probably already pouring champagne. The taxi pulled away from the coast, carrying me back toward the house. My body was in agony, but something else was burning even hotter inside me. Rage. Betrayal. A need to understand why. As the town lights blurred past the window, memories replayed in my mind. Franklin's hand on my shoulder, Priscilla's trembling voice, the way he told me not to check my mirrors. They hadn't sent me for medicine. They had sent me to die. And now, against all odds, I was going back, not as their victim, but as their reckoning. The taxi slowed as we turned onto my street. I recognized every tree, every curve in the road, every shadow cast by the tall hedges lining our property. It all looked painfully normal, like nothing had changed. But I knew better now. My body was screaming in protest as I paid the driver and stepped out into the cold air. My clothes were torn and damp, my hair stiff with salt water, my ribs aching with every breath. I leaned against the gate for a moment, gathering what little strength I had left. Inside the house, music drifted through the walls. Jazz. Laughter. The unmistakable pop of champagne corks. I moved slowly up the driveway, keeping to the darker side near the cedar trees. Each step felt unreal, like I was walking through someone else's dream or nightmare. When I reached the porch, I didn't go in right away. I stood just outside the door, listening. They were still celebrating. Priscilla's voice floated through the open windows, bright and animated. "I swear, This necklace alone must be worth a fortune, she said. My stomach tightened. That necklace belonged to our mother. I leaned closer to the glass and peered inside. Priscilla stood beneath the crystal chandelier in the foyer, draping Mom's vintage sapphire necklace around her throat. She turned side to side in front of the mirror, admiring herself like she was trying on a new identity. My sister, wearing my mother's jewelry less than an hour after hearing I was dead. Franklin came out of the kitchen holding a lobster tail in one hand and a champagne flute in the other. His cheeks were flushed, his smile loose and careless. "You look like royalty," he told her. She laughed. I felt bile rise in my throat. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned just as my best friend Sarah came running up the driveway, her coat soaked from the rain, her face pale with shock. She had heard the news on the radio. She thought she was coming to comfort a grieving family. She froze when she saw me standing there. Her eyes widened. "Deanna?" For a split second, neither of us spoke. Then she rushed forward and wrapped her arms around me carefully, afraid to hurt me. "You're alive," she whispered, her voice breaking. I nodded. But before either of us could say more, Sarah looked past my shoulder toward the front door. The music, the lights, the laughter drifting out into the night. Confusion crossed her face. "What's going on inside?" I didn't answer. I reached for the door. The brass knob felt ice cold in my hand as I turned it slowly and stepped inside my own home. Priscilla was still facing the mirror. She hadn't noticed us yet. She was too busy adjusting the sapphire necklace at her throat, smiling at her reflection. Then she saw me. Her eyes met mine in the glass. She spun around so fast the wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound cut through the music like a gunshot. Everything went silent. Franklin emerged from the kitchen mid-bite, lobster tail still in his hand. His face drained of color as he stared at me, mouth hanging open. I stepped fully into the light. Mud streaked my clothes. My hair was tangled. My face was bruised. But I was standing, alive. "I see you didn't waste a single moment mourning me," I said quietly. Priscilla made a choking sound, like an animal caught in a trap. Her hands flew to the necklace as she desperately tried to unclasp it, as if it were suddenly burning her skin. Sarah moved to stand beside me, her eyes fixed on them in disbelief. "What is this?" she demanded. "Why are there streamers? Why is there music? You told me you were devastated." Franklin swallowed hard and tried to speak. "We were just coping," he stammered. "Everyone grieves differently." His lie collapsed the moment I reached down and picked up a glossy brochure from the recycling bin near the door. A luxury yacht rental. I held it up. "Is this how you cope? Planning victory cruises?" He took a step toward me, his jaw tightening. "This is our house now," he snapped. "You don't get to come back here and accuse us of—" "You were supposed to be dead," he blurted out. The words hung in the air like poison. Sarah inhaled sharply. I met Franklin's eyes. "So that's what this was," I said softly. "You sent me to die." His expression shifted, anger flashing across his face like a reflex. Priscilla grabbed his arm. "Franklin, stop talking." But it was already too late. I took another step forward, ignoring the pain in my ribs. "You took out a life insurance policy on me last week," I said. "Did you really think I wouldn't find it?" Franklin's fists clenched. He lunged toward me. Sarah reacted instantly, stepping in front of me and pulling out her phone. She raised it, the camera light blazing directly into his face. "Don't," she warned. "You touch her, and everyone sees it. I'm streaming this live." He froze. I could see it in his eyes, the calculation, the panic. He glanced at the glowing screen, at the scrolling comments, at the digital witnesses he hadn't planned for. Slowly, he backed away. Priscilla recovered faster than I expected. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a leather portfolio, slamming it onto the coffee table. "Enough," she said sharply. "If you're alive, then we need to settle this now." She flipped it open and shoved papers toward me. "A new will, transfer documents. Sign these, and we can move forward." I stared at the forged signatures, at my parents' names written in shaky imitation. She looked at me with cold eyes. "You caused us severe emotional distress tonight," she said. "Your survival disrupted our financial planning. You owe us compensation. I almost laughed. Instead, I shook my head slowly. You don't own this house, I told her. You never did. Her lips tightened. Yes, I though. No, I replied. The estate was placed into an irrevocable trust 5 years ago. Dad made me the sole trustee. The color drained from her face. That's impossible, she whispered. It's not, I said. It was designed specifically to protect the property from creditors and greedy relatives. Her hands began to tremble. I turned to Franklin. And those grease stains in the garage? From when you cut my brake lines? Priscilla whipped around to stare at him. You said you cleaned everything. They started shouting at each other, accusations spilling out in front of us like rotten secrets. I picked up the forged documents from the table. These will be evidence. Franklin suddenly charged again, desperation written all over his face. Sarah raised the phone higher. Go ahead, she said coldly. 5,000 people are watching. He stopped inches from me, breathing hard. For the first time, I saw fear replace his rage. They weren't in control anymore. They were exposed. And standing there in my parents' living room, surrounded by broken glass and spilled champagne, I realized something powerful. They had tried to erase me. Instead, they had given me the chance to take everything back. The house felt different after that. Not quieter, heavier. The champagne bubbles had gone flat. The jazz music had stopped. What remained was the thick, suffocating silence of people who knew their lies were unraveling in real time. Sarah stayed close to me, her phone still raised, recording everything. Franklin hovered near the kitchen doorway like a trapped animal, pacing in short, frantic steps. Priscilla stood rigid beside the staircase, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, staring at me with a hatred so raw it almost surprised me. I had seen my sister angry before. I had never seen her afraid. I held the forged documents against my ribs, feeling their sharp edges through my torn jacket. You need to leave, I said quietly. Both of you. Now. Franklin let out a bitter laugh. You don't get to order us around anymore. I met his eyes. Oh, I do. Sarah lowered her phone just long enough to dial emergency services, keeping the camera rolling as she spoke. Her voice was calm, professional, like she had rehearsed this moment in her head. Yes, I'd like to report an attempted homicide and insurance fraud. We have the victim here. We also have forged documents and a live confession. Franklin froze. Priscilla's composure finally cracked. This is insane, she snapped. She's manipulating everything. She always plays the victim. I turned to her slowly. You celebrated my death, I said. You wore Mom's necklace while watching the news. You planned yacht trips and renovations while I was bleeding in the ocean. Her mouth opened, then closed again. For once, she had nothing. Minutes later, red and blue lights began flashing against the front windows. The sound of sirens echoed down the street, bouncing off the cliffs like judgment arriving on schedule. I stepped onto the porch with Sarah beside me, as multiple police cruisers pulled into the driveway. Officers moved quickly, spreading out across the property with practiced precision. Detective Burke approached first, a tall man with tired eyes and a voice that carried authority without shouting. He listened while Sarah summarized what had happened, then turned to me. Are you Deanna? Yes. You were reported deceased earlier this evening. I know. He nodded once, then gestured toward the house. Let's go inside. Franklin and Priscilla were separated immediately. Franklin tried to protest, raising his voice, insisting he was being harassed on his own property. Detective Burke cut him off with a single look. Hands where I can see them. They escorted us into the living room, which now felt more like a crime scene than a home. Broken glass still glittered on the marble floor. Empty champagne bottles stood like silent witnesses on the counter. I handed over the forged will and the insurance policy. The detective examined the documents carefully, then slipped on gloves. This policy was taken out last week? He asked. Yes, without my knowledge. He nodded again, his jaw tightening. Later that night, at the station, everything became painfully real. I sat across a metal table, while Detective Burke opened a thick manila folder. Sarah sat beside me, her fingers wrapped tightly around a paper cup of cold coffee. The first photograph he slid across the table made my stomach turn. It was a close-up of my SUV's brake line, cleanly severed. "This wasn't corrosion," he said. "This was cut with heavy-duty bolt cutters." I closed my eyes for a moment, so I hadn't imagined it. Then came the digital evidence. Franklin's laptop history. Search queries from 2 days before the crash. How to disable hydraulic brakes. How to avoid dashboard warning sensors. How long it takes for a severed brake line to fully fail. I felt sick listening to the list. He hadn't acted in panic. He had researched my death. Detective Burke explained that this level of preparation elevated the charge significantly. This wasn't reckless endangerment. This was attempted first-degree murder. Next came the financial motive. The insurance paperwork showed Priscilla as the sole beneficiary, with a double indemnity clause triggered by accidental vehicular death. The payout was just over $2 million. $2 million. That was what my life was worth to her. Sarah gave her witness statement, describing the music, the champagne, the decorations, and Priscilla wearing my mother's necklace while the news played in the background. Her testimony established intent, what the law calls mens rea. They weren't confused or in shock. They were celebrating. Detective Burke leaned back in his chair. "We have physical evidence, digital evidence, financial motive, and eyewitness testimony," he said. "But we'd like a verbal admission if possible." He proposed a controlled phone call. I would call the house. I would pretend I was wavering, offer to fix the car quietly for insurance purposes if they admitted what they had done. My hands shook as I dialed the number that used to mean home. Priscilla answered on the second ring. Her voice was sharp, suspicious. I forced myself to sound uncertain. "I don't want this to get bigger than it has to be," I said. "If you just tell me what Franklin did to the brakes, I can say it was mechanical failure." There was a pause. Then Franklin's voice came through the line. "You're alive," he said flatly. "Yes." Another pause. "Finally," he muttered. "You weren't supposed to survive that curve." The recording equipment captured every word. That was enough. By early morning, officers returned to the mansion. They found Priscilla and Franklin in the hallway, surrounded by open suitcases, stuffed with cash and jewelry. Franklin dropped a stack of silver bullion when he saw the uniforms. It hit the floor with a dull metallic thud. Detective Burke announced the charges. Attempted first-degree murder, insurance fraud, conspiracy. Franklin collapsed first. He fell to his knees, pointing at Priscilla through sobs. "She told me what wire to cut. She said nobody would miss her sister anyway," Priscilla screamed. She fought the officers as they cuffed her, insisting she was the rightful heir, that I had framed her, that Franklin ruined everything. They didn't listen. I watched from the doorway as they were led outside, past reporters and flashing cameras. Priscilla turned back once, locking eyes with me. "This isn't over," she hissed. But it was. The vultures had finally been caged. And standing there in the early morning fog, watching police cars disappear down the coastal road, I realized something profound. They had tried to erase me for money. Instead, they had handed me the truth. And the truth was about to rebuild my entire life. More than a year has passed since that night, but some memories don't fade with time. They simply settle deeper into your bones. The courtroom was silent when the judge finally spoke. No music, no champagne. Just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the quiet breathing of strangers who had gathered to witness the end of a family. I sat in the second row, my hands folded in my lap, staring straight ahead. Sarah was beside me, her shoulder brushing mine, a steady reminder that I wasn't alone anymore. Priscilla stood in front of the bench, in an orange jumpsuit that looked painfully ordinary on someone who had once obsessed over designer dresses. Franklin was beside her, thinner than I remembered, his eyes fixed on the floor. They didn't look powerful anymore. They looked small. The judge began reading the verdict. Priscilla was found guilty of attempted first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. The evidence had painted her as the architect of everything: the forged documents, the policy, the pressure placed on Franklin to sabotage my vehicle. She was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Franklin received 20 years without the possibility of parole for physically tampering with my brakes and participating in the financial scheme. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumph. I felt something quieter and heavier, like a door closing in a house I would never return to. They were led away in shackles, and I watched without flinching. These were the same people who had once shared holiday meals with me, who had laughed at childhood photos, who had sat at my parents' bedside when illness crept into our home. And they had decided my life was worth less than a renovation. I walked out of the courthouse that day into pale winter sunlight, took a deep breath, and understood that justice doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it feels like silence. The months that followed were about undoing. I couldn't stay in that mansion. Every hallway echoed with memories. Every room felt contaminated by greed and betrayal. So I hired a professional estate liquidator and began dismantling the life I had once protected so fiercely. The furniture went first, then the artwork, then the pieces Priscilla had tried to sell in her rush for cash. The house itself was eventually sold to a young family who had no connection to our past. Watching their children run through the yard during the final walkthrough felt strangely comforting. That space deserved laughter again, not whispered conspiracies. I took the proceeds from the sale and combined them with the assets from the family trust. Then I left. I moved to a quiet mountain town in Vermont, where no one knew my name or my story. I rented a small cottage with a wood-burning fireplace and tall windows that looked out onto pine trees instead of cliffs. For the first time in years, I slept without locking my bedroom door. Priscilla tried to contact me from prison during those first few months. Her handwriting was frantic, uneven. I never opened the letters. I dropped them directly into the fireplace and watched the envelopes curl and blacken, turning into ash the same way she had tried to erase me. Franklin's lawyer reached out once, asking if I would provide a character reference for an appeal. I told my attorney to block all future communication. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. I returned to my work as a book restorer in a small downtown studio. There was something deeply healing about repairing torn pages and broken bindings. Every book felt like a quiet reminder that even damaged things can be made whole again. I also did something else. I used part of my inheritance to establish a small foundation for victims of family betrayal and financial abuse. I didn't advertise it. I didn't attach my name to it publicly. I just wanted the money that had nearly cost me my life to help someone else escape their own darkness. Sarah remained my closest friend through everything. She had seen me at my weakest and stood beside me when it mattered. Some nights we sat on my back porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. Those moments taught me more about loyalty than blood ever had. People often ask how I managed to forgive. The truth is, I didn't. I chose something better. I chose distance. I chose peace. I chose to build a life that didn't revolve around people who saw me as expendable. The crash took my car. It took my innocence, but it gave me clarity. It taught me that sharing DNA doesn't guarantee love, that sometimes strangers save your life while family plans your funeral. That greed is a disease that can hollow people out until there's nothing left but appetite. And it taught me something else too. We have to protect ourselves legally, financially, emotionally, even from those closest to us. Creating safeguards doesn't mean you expect betrayal. It means you respect your own future. I survived a cliff. I survived betrayal. And I rebuilt a life that belongs entirely to me. Some evenings, when the air is quiet and the mountains glow pink in the fading light, I sit on my porch and think about how close I came to disappearing. Then I take a deep breath, because I'm still here. And that, more than anything else, is my victory. Stories like this aren't just about revenge, they're about awakening. What happened to me wasn't only a crime, it was a reminder of how fragile trust can be, and how powerful survival truly is. Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it wears the face of family. But even in the darkest moments, there is still a choice: to break or to rise. This journey taught me that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet strength, sometimes it's walking away, and sometimes it's rebuilding your life piece by piece, refusing to let hatred become your home. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on your own relationships, your own resilience, then I hope you'll stay with us. Here on Revenge Truth Vault, we share stories of loss, courage, rebirth, and the hidden strength inside ordinary people. Every subscribe, every comment, every moment you spend listening helps keep these voices alive. So please, take a second to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what would you have done in my place. Thank you for walking this emotional road with me. Until next time, stay strong and never forget your worth.